The bad news is that twice in 2005, the governments missed huge opportunities to make progress in disarmament. For the first time at the 2005 Review Conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and then for the second time at the 2005 UN World Summit. There are very serious fractures in the disarmament and non-proliferation regime right now, and that's coming through in these huge processes. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is the cornerstone of the current international legal regime concerning disarmament and non-proliferation. And countries that are members to that treaty meet and review its implementation every 5 years. And in 2000, we had this really big win, well, relatively big win, where these governments agreed unanimously to 13 practical steps to nuclear disarmament. And everyone agreed, and they said, we're going to have these 13 steps, and we're going to move towards disarmament. But then in 2005, in the post-September 11th world, the United States refused to even refer to the 2000 agreement and the 13 practical steps. And they refused to even refer to it in an asterisk in a footnote. So, because the other countries weren't willing to agree to having no reference to the 2000 review conference, the 2005 review conference didn't agree on any substance whatsoever. They had a procedural report that they put out, and that was it. Right now, the United States is resisting any constraints on its power in international institutions, and what we're seeing is other governments reacting to that in different ways, from accommodation to confrontation. And most of the international disarmament machinery, the bodies that are responsible for making progress in this area, are deadlocked. And so it's really difficult to get anything done. Things are really tense, and power is lopsided, and governments are looking around and trying to figure out what's going to happen in this post-Cold War world. The Conference on Disarmament is located in Geneva, and it's responsible for negotiating international disarmament treaties, and it's the sole international body that's recognized as being responsible for negotiating these treaties, like the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which is its most recent success, which was negotiated in the early 90s. So for those of you that are quick on the math, you can come up with the fact that the CD hasn't done any substantive work in almost a decade. The CD has to agree by consensus on a program of work, and it hasn't been able to agree for almost 10 years on what to even work on, let alone starting work and not being able to do it. Countries have different competing priorities, and they can't agree on where to begin. The United States wants to work on what's called a fissile materials cutoff treaty, and that treaty, depending on its scope, could either prevent the future production of fissile materials for nuclear weapons, or it could prevent the future production of fissile materials for nuclear weapons and begin scaling back the enormous stockpiles that already exist of fissile materials for nuclear weapons. Russia and China want to work on what's called PAROS, or preventing an arms race in outer space. They're concerned that the United States is going to deploy weapons in space, which would take out their ability to deter the United States from attacking them. And they would like to develop an international treaty banning the placement of weapons in space. The Group of 21, which is primarily developing countries that aren't aligned with either the Eastern Bloc or the Western Bloc in the Conference on Disarmament, would like to work on nuclear disarmament and on what's called negative security assurances, or assurances from nuclear weapon states to non-nuclear weapon states that they will not use nuclear weapons against them. So last year, 6 countries, in 2005, 6 countries, Brazil, Canada, Kenya, Mexico, New Zealand, and Sweden, brought a resolution to the UN General Assembly's Disarmament Committee, or the first committee, that would do the latter. It would circumvent the consensus rule in the CD. And this resolution would have created the most popular proposal for a program of work, which is what allows the CD to work. with the CD's money and the CD's ambassadors and in the hallways of the CD. If and when the conference finally agreed to work, all of the work that was being done in the hallways would have been moved into the CD. Now, this resolution wasn't introduced last year, but it did create so much pressure on various governments, including Russia and China and the United States, that they decided that they would have these focused discussions. So the resolution wasn't introduced, but it had the effect of creating these focused discussions, which is the most work the CD has done in 10 years. And the reason the resolution wasn't introduced was, number one, pressure from the United States. The United States sent diplomats into capitals asking various capitals to not support this resolution. That's how important the United States saw it. And second of all, because the presidents of the current CD session had this plan to have focused discussions. So the president of the current CD said, hey guys, could you not introduce that resolution? Give us another chance. We're going to try to have these focused discussions and get things working. And the disarmament committee group said, okay, we'll give you 1 year and see if you can get anything off the ground. And if you don't do anything in the next year, the year that we're in right now, then we're going to bring that resolution back in the first committee or the disarmament committee if the CD doesn't do anything. So now it's June, and the first committee or disarmament committee starts in October, and the jury's still out on whether the CD has accomplished anything this year or not. Governments are talking to each other, civil society members are talking to each other, we're talking to the governments. Is this enough? And I would say that it's not enough if there's just discussions. But if we're moving towards negotiating, that is a huge accomplishment after a decade of deadlock. And Canada has a really particular role to play. Canada was one of the group that introduced this resolution in the first committee that created the pressure to get the CD working in the first place, and they're key in terms of working with like-minded states to put pressure on the United States. Second, civil society has to insist that the U.S. cannot develop weapons for space, and they cannot deploy them in space. You have to say no to missile defense and no to weapons in space. And third, and this is obvious, but you have to say no to preventive war in the name of non-proliferation. You can't have a legal regime that is then undermined by illegal wars in the name of non-proliferation. These are the specific concrete actions to take in the short to medium term, but to do this advocacy with a gender lens and in the framework of moving towards total and complete disarmament, and not to lose sight of that, and continue always to make that connection between these are the little steps that we're making now, and we're making them in the context of total abolition.
Thank you very much, Jennifer.